Hey everybody, welcome back to Historical Light, an independent Masonic show focused on the historical events and aspects within Freemasonry. As always, I'm your host, Brother Alex Powers, past master of Gardner Lodge number 65, Gardner, Kansas, current DDGM for 9A, and director of the Kansas Lodge of Research. If you don't mind, Brother Robert, I'll hand it over to you, our co-host, Robert Marshall. If you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Robert Marshall here, past master of Waco Lodge 92, current secretary. I'm the deputy director of the Kansas Lodge of Research, an academic historian, so I take this stuff way too seriously. Let's see. In some parts, I'm known as Rasputin. In other parts, I'm known as the traveling man, and really excited for tonight's episode.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us again, brother. And our special guest this evening, this is pretty cool. First time we've had on the show a non-Mason. We have with us tonight, I was going to call you brother. I guess that's weird. We haven't had a non-Mason on here, but Ainslie Heilich. I don't want to mess that up again. Heilich. And he is from the Oddfellows. And basically, we met online talking about the whole goat deal. And he has some interesting history behind it that he wants to share with us tonight. Before we jump into all that, I want to hand it over to you to further introduce yourself.
All right, cool. Like you mentioned, my name's Ainsley, and I am an Oddfellow. I am a member of Tuscola 316 in Tuscola, Illinois. We're right in the middle of the cornfields, and I have been a member for a little bit over 5 years now, and the lodge has been back from its dormant state for over 4 years now. It had initially closed in the 50s and we got it going again. So, yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really stoked for this conversation. Robert, are you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, like I said, this is the first time we've had a non-Mason and first time we've had an Oddfellow on the show, which is a subject that I've been really intrigued with for a while. As anyone that knows anything about Oddfellows, there's some neat similarities, which I'm not sure how deep they go since I'm not, but from face value, there's some really cool similarities between the two organizations. So hopefully we get a chance to address that tonight. Typically when we launch these shows, we start off with a couple leading questions. We're going to switch those up just slightly this evening. But starting off, I would like to know, do you have any connection to Freemasonry within your family history or anything?
I have had, deceased relatives that were members that I never met them or anything. They had passed before I came around. But sure. I do have like a great grandfather who was like a 32nd degree Mason, past master, all that good stuff. But other than that, I really don't have any family ties really to any fraternal groups other than, maybe some Masons here and there. But like I said, they were deceased before I came around. So other than, somebody's old sword that my dad has or like an apron or something, that's really all I had growing up with it. So
very cool. Well, on the flip side of that, within Oddfellows, I know you say you didn't have any other family connections. Do you not have any family connections within Oddfellows either?
Not at all. I actually kind of came into it quite by accident. The building that I co-own with my business partner was a former Oddfellows lodge. And when we got the building, we knew that going into it, but I didn't know anything about the organization. And we found a bunch of collars kind of stuffed up in a crawl space. And that just kind of started me down that journey of what is this stuff? And I just got hooked from there. And now I'm just really, I've gotten myself really, really embedded in deep. So, but I love it. It's been great. It's been a great ride.
That's awesome. Well, I think me and Robert and so many people watching the show can definitely kind of feel where you're coming from that on the Masonic side, just being able to connect with it on a certain level and then just getting drawn in way deeper than you ever thought you would be.
Yeah. It's like tar or something.
Yeah, right.
Quicksand.
So was it pretty much that lure that just drew you to Oddfellows, or what did you know about it before you joined that really attracted you to it?
I really really connected with the symbolism and
Okay.
the idea of being in. I've been kind of looking for something to kind of fill that group activity niche that I hadn't had since I had graduated high school back in the late 90s. I was really huge in band. So I was a big band geek, marching band, all that kind of stuff. And after you graduate high school or college or whatever, and you don't have those kind of group activities where you're working with a bunch of people towards a common goal, and I kind of missed that. And this just really was like, this could be that thing that kind of fills that hole that I'd had for, going on 20 years. And I found, some people that kind of had the same kind of feelings, and got enough people together to get the lodge going again. I'd been a member of a lodge that was nearby for about a year and a half, probably about 2 years before decided to take the plunge to go through the process of rechartering the lodge that had been closed for 65 years. So, but
Wow.
we got all back together, and yeah. So
That's pretty cool. So on that topic, because we kind of, like I said, there's so many similarities, right? But within that, recharting a lodge and stuff, how do you go about that? What's that process like on the Oddfellows side?
It's probably pretty similar. I don't have any, idea of what your chartering process is, but you need 15 people. They like 5 of them to be third-degree members so they can hold office right away, if possible. If not, they'll go through a degree day to get the people up to the third degree. And the state, the Grand Lodge in Illinois is very strong, and they're very involved. So it's definitely, having a good Grand Lodge is vital to getting a lodge charter. So definitely had a lot of support from the Grand Lodge, and just kind of had to do the groundwork of getting enough people to sign on, and, some other paperwork type stuff. But really, all in all, like, it took us maybe maybe 3-4 months to do. So we had the space already. We just had to kind of get it back in shape, looking like a lodge again, because it had been a junk room for probably, decades and decades.
Sure.
So it had not much similarity to what a lodge room. It was just a big empty canvas, basically. So kind of taking that and trying to turn it into what it would feel like had that continuity not been broken is
Sure.
kind of the goal that I had with it.
That's awesome, man. So I know we were talking before the show. We, unfortunately, here in Kansas, really don't have a strong Oddfellows population, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
They've always really kind of gotten my attention, just because, at least in rural communities, we noticed that a lot of Masonic lodges got their start by leasing space from the Oddfellows. And that always astonished me, at least here in Kansas. I know there's, obviously places within the United States where Oddfellows is still massively huge. But, for it to die off so much here, it used to be so much bigger than Masonry in these parts that, Masonic Lodge came to be. That's the first place they went. They went and leased space because it was so easily accessible and usable for their degrees. They just kind of intermeshed with the layout.
Yeah.
Robert, what's it like down in your area with the Oddfellow population?
There are still Oddfellow lodges. There are a few members of my Masonic lodge that are Oddfellows and
Really?
active. I would also say, in comparing to what you've experienced, it seems from my research to have been more common for Oddfellow lodges to rent from Masonic lodges down here when they were getting their starts. But regardless, the important point there is that they were sharing buildings. However, around the late 1800s, it starts popping up in our proceedings where, for whatever reason, the Masonic lodges were finding this to be a sketchy thing. So they actually passed a law disallowing Masonic lodges from letting any non-Masonic entity rent their lodges, which effectively included churches and schools and literally anything. But that conversation has currently been reopened, and it looks like maybe that'll be returned back to its original state.
But for now, it's still like that on the books?
That's correct. Yep. We're actually, in Texas, we're not allowed to rent out our lodge room to anything non-Masonic ever, not even a one-time event.
Wow.
The rest of the building may be rented out to other things if there's no door from the part of the building that's being rented to the part of the building that has the lodge room. Texas got real crazy about it for some reason.
That's interesting. So basically just kind of the banquet hall and extra rooms you guys can make your rental fees with, I guess.
That's correct.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, we're not strict on that so far in Kansas, but yeah, pretty much all the small lodges we find around here, they all started predominantly in Oddfellows halls. Few of them I found lease space from like a Knights of Pythagoras or something like that. But yeah, it's intriguing. Just unfortunately today, I know there's still a Grand Lodge meets every year in Topeka per their website. I found about 5 lodges that say they're active, but I've tried to contact them, you know, partly out of curiosity, partly when I was doing research for our lodge book, just to see if we could match up any records or anything. But I can't even get them to contact me. So I don't think it's a strong population left here in Kansas, unfortunately, but I'm definitely intrigued with the organization. Like I said, there's a lot of kind of blended lines there, so to speak, but a lot of history as well. I mean, both the orders go quite far back.
Yeah.
Before we jump into the meat tonight, would you mind, just for those that are curious, tell us a little bit about the Oddfellows organization and about a standard lodge meeting?
Okay, so I'll first preface it with my credentials. So I'm a past grand of my lodge, and I'm the current acting noble grand, which is, you know, like the head of your lodge, the worshipful master. And I am on the Sovereign Grand Lodge. I'm on the communications committee. So if you go on the website, I built the website and everything. And so if whoever sends any messages through the contact form of the website, I'm the lucky guy you'll be talking to on that end. So I donate quite a few hours out of my week to doing all the website, social media type, you know, posting type stuff. But the Oddfellows Lodge is probably set up pretty darn close to a Masonic lodge. It's a pretty universal kind of arrangement that any fraternal group tends to kind of, you know, if you go back to the Foresters and the Gardeners and all those guild-based organizations, probably all have that same kind of square around the room setup. And I think like the one thing that people do, they do notice that there are a lot of similarities, which there are, but there's also a lot of differences as well. And a lot of times we get painted as like a copy or something like that, which there was probably a lot of crossover influences. And I'm definitely not one to deny inspiration or members of both bringing things to back and forth, but it's definitely not a copy. And it definitely grew out of a specific need that was present in England in the 1700s, you know, in the Enlightened era going forward. And they were a group made up of, there's a couple different stories based on what you want to, you know, subscribe to, but somewhere in the middle is the truth, of course. But I like to go, the one I believe that seems the most logical is they were made up of skilled workers from the minor trades that were not large enough to have a guild of their own. And so they kind of started coming together to form almost like their own security net that they weren't eligible to have because they weren't operative in any of these trades. They were, you know, tinkerers. They were the lesser kind of polished trades that didn't have a higher skill set. They were kind of, you know, like the blue collar guys that just, you know, went and did their job and would travel around and need help finding jobs in different towns. And the lodge would help them to do that. Because they're, I think like the first written, I think it's the 1738 I want to say is the first newspaper writing that mentions a lodge. Loyal Aristus Lodge number 9, I think. I'm probably butchering that, so don't quote me on that. Something in that neighborhood. So if there were 9 lodges by around 1740, then that means going back a little bit more, there were some lodges. And then at one point there were about 20 different Oddfellow orders before they started congealing into the larger orders together, and eventually became the bigger groups, which are the Grand United Order of Oddfellows, which is still around today, and the Manchester Unity Independent Order of Oddfellows, which is also still around today in England, and the Thomas Wilde's Independent Order of Oddfellows, which started in 1819 in Baltimore. And that's the largest, most active group today. That is the worldwide organization that when people talk about Oddfellows, they generally are going to be speaking of the Thomas Wilde American Odd Fellowship, which then spread worldwide. And so here we are. Yeah. 200 years later, this year is, for our particular branch, is how long we've been going. So, but really it's, we're probably closing in on 300 for Odd Fellowship in general. But there's a couple definite, even though we have degrees and things like that and initiation, it's structured a lot. The philosophy is a lot different. The approach is a lot different. So definitely, once you do get into ritualistic type things, it's definitely that, like the first look, like, okay, we both have symbols. We both, sit in a lodge in a certain arrangement and have titles and wear regalia. But then it just diverges from there once you actually start looking at the actual meat of both orders and seeing that, no, they aren't. One's not copying the other. There are definitely 2 separate arms of the same fraternal animal, to kind of maybe think about it like that. And that's why so many people were members of both, and today are members of both, because they get different things out of each group that, Masonry might provide them one thing, but being an Oddfellow provides another experience that they're looking for. So there's definitely a lot of members out there that are both, and you'll see that, even going back on the old watch fobs and headstones, and you'll see the compass square and links together. Right. So I think definitely, like, the groups have a long history of being hand in hand, and just kind of got away from that. So even Albert Pike, he started off, he was an Oddfellow first before he became a Mason.
That's right. Yeah, so, I did read that. That's
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's a good point that you bring up about, the copy factor, because going through our lodge's history, we had quite a few of our charter members that were members of both, and I think probably largely led to why we leased space from them for so long. And Robert saying they have members even today that are within both there. So yeah, that's interesting. I guess one question I would have, you said with the makeup originally of, several smaller guilds or whatever, in Freemasonry, it's very predominantly off of the layout of the operative stonemasons. Do you have any feel of that? How would that transpose into the Oddfellows? Like what's the feel of your ritual, I guess, without giving it away?
I would say definitely, like, our ritual itself has been kind of over the years kind of evolved. As far as the 3 degrees go, they've been they started off a little bit more kind of a little bit more astrological, and then it started getting a little bit more into Old Testament-ish. So, like, nowadays they're definitely a little bit more Old Testament kind of Bible stories, but the initiation is definitely, that's our unique kind of standalone kind of moment that is completely our own and unique. And it's definitely not really based around occupation. It's more based around just a call to something larger. It's all around the memento mori, and you have this much time on your earth. What are you going to do with it? And that's what it boils down to, is you're going to die. You could die tomorrow. You could die in 70 years. You don't know, but what are you going to do? And that's really what it boils down to, is what are you going to do with your time on earth? Are you going to be selfish, or are you going to try to become a better person by helping others?
Right.
So.
Well, Robert, so you've got more of a more current connection to Oddfellows in some which way, I guess, with you knowing guys in your lodge that are mixed over. What questions come to your mind?
What questions come to my mind? I wonder, is there any sense of, I don't know how to put it, but so on the Masonic side, there's sometimes chips on guys' shoulders when talking about other social societies of, like you mentioned, you guys get cast in the light of it being a knockoff. Do you see generally that Oddfellows kind of feel almost attacked with that sort of description often being laid on them?
It's actually kind of more of like kind of a shrug, a shoulder shrug. If you if you go, on Facebook and stuff and look through the message threads and the comments and stuff, generally, you'll see that like everybody's really, for the most part, is not too concerned with what other groups, or whatever say about us or think about us, because there's probably a lot of detachment of a lot of the members from even knowing that people think that sort of thing. So there's that. But there's also, people that, we kind of understand that we're the underdog group going like forward where we are right now. We've kind of secret societied ourselves to death, for lack of better words. We didn't do a good job in the 20th century of keeping our name out in the, the public conscience. And so I don't, I feel like the conversation does come up, and nobody has any kind of ill, like kind of feelings towards, obviously Masonry being the biggest group, towards those groups thinking that it's like a knockoff. It's more of like if they would know better if they really got to know us kind of thing. And we know how at face value it does, any lodge group is going to look like the same kind of thing, if you got a handshake and a password and funny titles, and you sit in a room and put on robes and stuff. It's gonna at face value look like, but I don't think we really have any, I don't know exactly what
bad taste in your mouth kind of thing.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Yeah.
I think it's like we recognize from the outside how that can be the interpretation, but also knowing that the reality is different.
Yeah, it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
So out of curiosity, I pulled up an Oddfellows history page, and it actually mentions that George IV is considered to have been the first, or one of the first, crossovers, who was also a Mason and an Oddfellow, which is pretty interesting, since he was king in the 1820s. And coming to power in the 18 teens, which for Freemasonry is an interesting era. That's when our first two Grand Lodges, or two of the first Grand Lodges, united and became what we call the United Grand Lodge of England. While I was looking at that, I saw that about 30 years prior, you had a couple of the leading Oddfellow Grand Lodges uniting and referring to themselves as a United Grand Order. I've never seen any suggestion that the example made by the Oddfellows doing that influenced Freemasonry to do it, but I'd sure enjoy running down that rabbit hole to see if there were any known connections.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of kind of stuff that was like simultaneously within like a couple decades of each other. Like in the 1850s, we started the Rebeccas, and then I think 10 years later, the Eastern Star came around. So there's, we kind of started doing the orphanages and the old folks' homes, and then the Masons were like, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe we should do some of that. So there's definitely a little bit of like, who did this first, who did, so it's, and when you start kind of looking at that, it's like maybe, okay, the Masons are the big granddaddy of them all that has outlasted everybody else and still has the largest kind of awareness. But then, there are these other little groups that kind of trickled along and kind of were bigger or smaller, and kind of everybody influenced everybody. And
Sure.
it's definitely, you know, it's good to definitely not think of it as a competition, but more of like, just like I say, like different arms on the same fraternal animal, that we're all working towards the common good. So
Yeah. So I didn't mean to point it in a who had a United Grand Order first
Right.
direction, so much as I guess realizing in the moment the great potential value in having the two similar organizations that are still unique, and being able to implement ideas in one as a sort of testing ground. And if it works out, as you said, for example, with the orphanages, that was a tremendous success that the Oddfellows were apparently doing first. The Masons were able to see the value in doing it and try it out themselves. I think it's an interesting dynamic going there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at any sort of trends, as far as like even like today with business and people jumping on the same train, that like, you know, oh, well, they're doing this, I better with my business start doing something. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of back and forth and kind of borrowing from each other, just as far as the groups grew and got bigger and had more lodges, and they needed to kind of organize in one way or another. And I'm sure with Freemasonry, those first few decades, once they did kind of get under those grand lodges, started off rough as heck. And it took like a couple decades to kind of get everything sorted out, and everybody who couldn't agree to get them to kind of cut some sort of agreement on how we're going to move forward. Which,
oh, well, you'll have to probably wait to find out what that's like, because we're still trying to figure out how to agree 300 years later.
yeah, well, absolutely, yeah. we could agree on some things, and on other things, and that's, you know, the progress goes, it's, you know, slow, 1 year at a time, baby steps, because you have to wait to the next session to be able to make any more progress. And yeah, it's definitely a slow evolving behemoth. That it's, yeah, but it definitely, it's a slow process and kind of plunders along, which these days it can be frustrating. And the 2020 era versus, you know, 200 years ago, it was, you know, you had the time to do that. But
I'd be curious to ask, so you've touched on the term Oddfellows, how it was almost in a sense of guys who were kind of odd job type of people who maybe wouldn't have had the numbers as a different guild or what have you. But the first letter, independent order of Oddfellows, I find it interesting that they found that word to be so important that they should include it in the official name of the organization. Is there some kind of known inspiration for wanting to tell the world we're independent?
So whenever they started, you know, like I mentioned earlier, there were like a couple dozen up to upwards, you know, 20 or so different Oddfellow orders. And so the independent name started showing up in the early 1800s. And I want to say maybe Manchester Unity was the first to use the Independent Order of Oddfellows name under it. And they chose to use that because to show that they were separate from any political organization. They weren't, you know, anything under the crown. They weren't working against the crown. They weren't affiliated with any church, because at that time, England definitely was very suspicious of any groups of people that were organized in any manner working against the church or working against the crown. And so they had to be careful, and when they were getting organized, to make sure they weren't going to put themselves in any sort of danger, because, you know, a lot of the Oath Act or something that they had where
1798
round, or so. Yep. I think it was a way to show that they were independent of political or sectarian influences. And it was its own separate thing that was purely for the purposes they prescribed, and that there was no other, you know, function. It's not an arm of the church. It's not secret arm of a political movement working to dethrone the king or queen. So, and also it established them as independent from all the previous iterations of odd fellowship that had preceded them.
Yeah. On the Masonic side, you get cases of the two big cases of the early leading Grand Lodges, one referring to themselves as, oh man, not ancient, Alex, but
So you thinking of the ancients and moderns, or?
thank you. So you had one referring to themselves as moderns, and some referring to themselves as ancients, to distinguish from one another in a similar way. But I would imagine you'd be hard pressed to find any Freemason who doesn't really like the idea of the theme of non-sectarian unity being such an important theme that you would actually put it in your name. So that's really cool.
It's definitely like one of the cornerstones of our meetings and our ritual. And if you go back and look at older versions of ritual, like even like, I think the earliest one that I've got a copy of is from like 1798, which is the Patriotic Order of Oddfellows. And then there's like the ancient, there's a bunch of, we have an ancient order as well, but a bunch of them are, pick your good sounding name at the time, blah, 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 Order of Oddfellows. And yeah, it's not a religious type thing at all. And it even says, during, the same thing that's at our meetings now, at the time we admit no political, sectarian, or other improper debate. And that's how we start every meeting. And before we open it, that's part of our ritual. And it's a very important thing that we take very seriously to keep harmony in the lodge, because that stuff is going to totally distract you from the work you're doing. And I think even today, it makes a really kind of a good point of kind of showing people that groups like, these fraternal groups, that they think of it as just like a bunch of old white men, but younger people are coming to it because it is a space that is free from all that crap. And you can come together and see people as people and not as their Facebook posts. And that's, I think, the power that any fraternal organization has right now, is really bringing people back together again and seeing people as people, and kind of, I don't want to call it like forced politeness, but it kind of is in a way where it's, you are behaving in a certain decorous manner because that's kind of part of the ritual. And it's just, it kind of reminds us that we're here not because of, whatever reasons. And hey, I don't like that post you just made on Facebook, but we're not going to talk about it. And I'm going to shake your hand and we're going to have a good meeting or a good event or whatever. And I think it's a great way to break down those walls that social media definitely is helping to reinforce negative in a bad way and kind of split everybody. So yeah, that the independent is definitely very important. The no political sectarian stuff is very important.
So Ainsley, I understand you are in the ante room of your lodge. So do you think maybe you could kind of show us around, point out a few things?
Sure. So let's see, I've got you on the, you have to look at my little itty bitty thumbnail. So let me actually unhook you from my ring light here. And I could even give you guys a quick tour of the lodge room. So
wow.
I'm trying to come back to the beginning of the ante room here. So trying to see this little itty bitty square. So got a bunch of cool, antiques and stuff. Oh yeah, so as a bonus, I live here too. So I live in the front half of the second floor, and so I live in the lodge. So
you're living the dream, Ainsley.
I know. So this is a bunch of stuff that I've been collecting over the years. And
do you have a favorite item in there that you've collected?
Oh geez, I'm pretty fond of this degree chart.
Oh yeah, wow.
Not in the best of shape, but it's a pretty cool one. It's got all the items on there. I got a couple handmade items down here that I've gotten a hold of. Like cut out, like, I don't know if it's like
nice.
silver plated or what that is. And then I've got
A
the
large tapestry.
Yeah, we're definitely into our big tapestry. So that nice little big old tapestry. And yeah, I'll take a quick swing around the lodge room.
Sweet.
So
Dude, you know, Robert, how much would this work to our benefit on committees when we're trying to get stuff done at lodge if you own the damn place?
right. So yeah, so that's our room, and so just got your 4 stations around the room and a bunch of stuff hung up, and yeah, so this is like in the back of the 2nd floor of the building, and I live in the front half. So yeah, that's the.
So Ainsley, before you leave the lodge room, if you don't mind, sorry, man, just for clarification, trying to cross some of the things. Would it be cool? Could you like point out the officer chairs and what they are, just to kind of give some perspective?
So as you come in, so this would be the vice grand station with the left and right supporter, and then scene supporters in the front. Those chairs are usually empty in the front there. Then coming around this way, I don't know if everything's mirrored because I'm using the forward-facing camera. So this is the chaplain station. And then let's come around this way. There we go. So behind me is the Noble Grand's chair with the left and right supporter. Over here is the warden. Right there's the conductor. And then of course the secretary and treasurer up there. And then you come around here, and that's for the past grand to sit.
That's fantastic. So yeah, I'm noticing right off the bat that different officers sit different places from what we're used to.
Right.
Positions are very, I mean, that's where our positions are.
Yeah. We don't, in our particular lodge, we don't use an altar.
Okay.
Some lodges do, especially in Europe. The Oddfellows in Europe will use an altar. But what you'll find in a lot of lodges in North America is you'll find links on the floor, either tile, carpet, or something, and that kind of acts as our no-go zone of, you don't cross your links. So
interesting. No, the point I was gonna point out there I thought was pretty hilarious. Yeah, you pointed to the one chair on the side for the past grand. That's symbolized as the chair in the north, and it's supposed to be a place of darkness. Nobody sits. However, at least here in Kansas, that's typically where a past master who's gained some weight sits, because it's a big rest. So
yes,
just kind of a funny symbology there.
And probably if you look at that 1798 ritual, it probably does have a little bit more Masonic influence than our current ritual does. They did definitely go through a bunch of different revisions at different points depending on which order. So, but at the same time, I guess one thing that we don't have that Masons definitely seem to be plagued by the clandestine Masonry. Where even though there's different branches of Oddfellows, we do recognize them all. And
so, we don't have any problem with clandestine Masonry. I never hear about that.
So that's like one of those kind of interesting things that, like, seeing, obviously there are like a lot of fake Masonic bodies that are purely used as money-making schemes or whatever, but I guess we've just been fortunate not to nobody wanted to fake an Oddfellow lodge yet. I guess, of course, I say that out loud and now we'll be plagued by them, but
we got something to send your way.
So you mentioned just now some influence of Masonic ritual in the early Oddfellow ritual, which makes sense. If some of the early Oddfellows were already Masons, it would have been easy place to be inspired from. I'm curious, off the top of your head, if there were any other strong influences or organizations that you can recognize in your ritual. You know, for example, in Freemasonry, we can find instances of say alchemy, or even Christian church traditions, and different things like that. You can actually find kind of influence of, simply because the early members were coming from those kinds of backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. So definitely the earlier ritual was a little bit more of that Enlightenment era, touches into very lightly, just grazes into alchemy a little bit. And our ritual today has kind of gotten a little bit away from that, but it's still there if you dig, if you kind of really sit and look at it, and you're like, oh yeah. And it doesn't slap you in the face with it. And it's definitely not as, it's not as heavy as it is in Masonry with the alchemical references and things like that. But we do have, where was I going with that? There is like a lighter touch of it, definitely, and more so in the older ritual than now. I think, you know, the 1800s did a lot of kind of watering down and getting rid of some of that type stuff. I think probably in part because of the anti-Masonic movement and trying to distinguish ourselves away from Masonry to not get caught up in that fervor that was, you know, really damaging to the Masons. And I think it benefited the Oddfellows greatly, because I think that's how the Oddfellows outranked the Masons for a couple of years there, because we were like the other group you could join that was, you know, Knights of Pythias and all that kind of.
We're not with those guys.
So that's interesting. So sadly, that's actually also rather true of Masonry, that whether it be the alchemical influence or any of the other early things you see in Masonry, like Giordano Bruno's Art of Memory, or any of these types of things, you see in the 1800s, as a result of the anti-Masonic party and other elements, the Catholic Church really coming down hard on Masonry in the 1700s. You see intentional steps away from what we know were rather essential components to Masonry in the early years, meaning even Masonry was getting away from Masonry, and to this day lacks some of the components that it really cherished in the early years.
Yeah,
I know the Oddfellows were also victims of persecution by the Catholic Church. Isn't that right?
I don't know a lot about specifically the Catholic Church. I know that they were anti any fraternal group, you know, that was not Catholic, but the Knights of Columbus. But there were definitely a lot of there were books published that were anti-Oddfellows, that were by like different reverends and ministers to try to discredit it. But it's interesting because there were a lot of reverends and ministers that were Oddfellows, like Reverend Grosh, who started the Grange, and he was the writer of probably one of the better books on Oddfellowship out there. So it's kind of it was okay with some and not with others. So it's kind of a hard way to, without really extensively kind of being able to find, you know, articles about it other than just like kind of like reprint hearsay. So, but yeah, on archive.org, there's a couple books of trying to expose which we'll kind of get into the talk later with the goat, the expose on the Oddfellows initiation. And it's just so ridiculous. It's obviously somebody who's never been in any sort of fraternal group and claiming that they had infiltrated and all that kind of stuff. And you read it and you're like, this is absolutely nothing at all like anything in our ritual, that they just completely, it's not like they even took like the ritual and like read it and were like, haha, I'm going to spin this. It was like, they hadn't even read the ritual to even like make it a mess. So I don't know. It's kind of funny how the 1800s definitely had a big pushback against our groups I guess because they're powerful. They were getting a lot of money and influence.
I don't
So
want
I
to
guess
say
it
I'm
makes-
glad, but I would say it's nice to hear and recognize the similarities in how, and I guess it's just human nature that
Mhm.
we tend to fill in the gaps of our ignorance, especially the largest gaps with the biggest chunks of nonsense. And it sounds like you guys were victims of that, just as we often were.
Yeah. It's like we quit wearing the aprons partially because to try to not be anyhow mistaken for Masons. And the Grand United Order of Oddfellows, they still wear the aprons, but we don't in the independent order. And, you know, that's definitely kind of one of those things that I could tell by the changes to the ritual that they made at different points in the 1800s and changing the regalia and stuff like that, that they were definitely very greatly concerned with what the public's perception or the critics, I guess, were saying. So,
Sure.
Us too.
Oh, go. Sorry, brother. Go ahead.
I was just saying us too.
yeah. But yeah, it watered down a lot of the good stuff out of the ritual. So if you want, it's like almost like you got to go digging if you really want to get into it. And so in a way, it's kind of fun because you have to, like, every member has to decide if they want to go on that journey or not and go on that treasure hunt, or if they just want to, you know, just take it at face value and, you know, just be like, this is what it says in our ritual. That's all there is to know, you know. So
That doesn't sound familiar at all.
yeah. Yeah, like I see like a lot of the no skulls and Freemasonry kind of issue going on.
Oh, see Robert's eyes. It's not panned over to him right now, but yeah, that's still going on at the moment.
So yeah, it's kind of interesting, like kind of seeing even today those disagreements happening.
Well, you mentioned the no skulls and masonry. So what I've
Open that
found,
can of worms, are we?
what I've found interesting about the skull issue with Freemasonry, this gets back into the anti-Masonic stuff we were talking about, and it also ties in with one of our main topics tonight, which maybe we'll be segueing into here now. I don't know, but what I've found is that going back to at least the 1840s, you find that the two most common motifs picked up by anti-Masons to put Masonry in a bad light were skulls and goats.
Yeah.
It was all about the skulls and the goats. If they've got skulls and goats, they must be doing bad things. And God forbid it be a goat skull.
Yeah. Because that means really bad. It's like they're like doing sacrifices and conjuring the devil.
Oh yeah. Brother Carl Hearn posted on his feed today a picture of a goat holding a skull. Something along the lines of, you know, let's start some ruckus. And I commented, frankly, lose the goat and I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
I think
I
like definitely in Oddfellows, we've embraced our inner goat. And even though it's not an official part of anything and it never was a part of anything, it's just one of those almost like a kind of like a running gag almost is what it kind of feels like. Is it's the joke that never ends, but we totally embrace it. At least the people I've talked to it about are totally down with the goat.
Just before we transition over to the goat, I do have one more question just to kind of sum up Oddfellows for me. But before I do that, I want to segue over to Robert and make fun of him real fast. Robert, put your hands in the camera's view. Say something so we can hear you.
Hello, these are my hands.
Y'all have had a few days of cold weather, and now we've got Robert in gloves. You Texas can't handle it, can you?
My beanie's right over there. I took the beanie off.
So I was down in Texas yesterday for a work trip. Sadly, it was a very hectic one-day trip, so I didn't get time to see Robert or really do anything of pleasure value. But it was I was hoping for a nice warm Texas day, get away from the Kansas weather. I apparently brought the Kansas with me, and it was low 60s, rainy, just mucky weather. Flying back to Kansas last night, I don't remember what the temperature was, but it was god-awful cold. And
Yeah.
as soon as I left that airport, I could just feel it in my chest. I about died. I ran for the stairwell, which was heated, and sought out shelter there until I could remember where the heck I parked. But
Yeah, we had
that
about
was, pretty
a couple
funny.
inches of snow yesterday that really mucked things up a good bit here. So
Is that right?
yeah, winter's here.
With a vengeance.
Boom.
Well, last question I really have for the kind of summing up Oddfellows here. I'm trying to remember the overall structure. We've talked about kind of the grand orders, comparatively speaking. Within Masonry, per state, we have a Grand Lodge per state, which kind of dictates that jurisdiction. Do you guys have something comparable for your jurisdictions, or does it just go all the way to the top?
Yeah, so every jurisdiction has a Grand Lodge, and then from there, every Grand Lodge can send 2 reps to Sovereign Grand Lodge every year. And so we have basically like the state government, which is also in, Canada and anywhere that there's, enough lodges to have a grand body. And then they all then report to the Sovereign Grand Lodge every year to, do legislation for the whole kind of kit and caboodle thing. And we also have quasi-independent Grand Lodges. So, mostly based by region of the planet and economic type stuff. So the Grand Lodge of Europe has the Grand Lodge of Norway and Sweden. So they all report to the Grand Lodge of Europe, which is quasi-independent from the Sovereign Grand Lodge. They still have to have the same ritual. There's a certain amount of things that have to be maintained between the two, but they're allowed to kind of do the Oddfellows the way they want to do in Europe. And there are differences between the European Oddfellows and the American or North American, meaning United States and Canada. I say America meaning continental, not just United States. And the Australasia, so the Philippines, which is having just the past, 10, 15 years, they've just had a huge explosion at Oddfellows. And Australia, and then, I think they're trying to get a lodge back in New Zealand and stuff like that. So yeah, so we got a couple semi-independent Grand Lodges, but they still have to fall under the Sovereign Grand Lodge with certain respects and regards. So if that kind of makes sense, it gets a little murky, but yeah.
Thank you so much for explaining that. Well, Brother Robert, do you have anything else on the basis of Oddfellow lodges before we transition into the GOAT?
I do not, but for anyone out there interested in reading about a prominent Oddfellow and Mason, you can go to wacomasonic.org/Marcus-Herring. He was a past Grand Master of the Oddfellows of Texas. He was a prominent member of Waco Masonic Lodge. There was a Masonic Lodge named after him, and he founded the Oddfellows Orphanage and Widows Home for the state of Texas. So he was probably the most important Oddfellow in Texas history.
Nice.
Very cool. Well, if you don't mind, man, when we get the show notes written up, make sure we get that included and a link to that so everyone can check that information out. All right. Well, we will transfer over to the, I guess, the meat and potatoes of this evening. I know a lot of people are going to be looking forward to this topic. So we're going to be talking about the GOAT. This is how I met Ainsley on So just to give a little backstory on my end, when I came into Freemasonry back in 2014, it was a joke. I heard about it when I was going through my degrees. They're going to get the GOAT ready and stuff.
Yep.
I even tagged along early on and made a few GOAT jokes. It stuck with me, though. There was one guy at the table that just did not have it. He wasn't rude and disrespectful, but he made it clear that he did not see the humor in it and kind of explained why. And I defended the GOAT, believe it or not. I was just like, dude, what's the point? And I didn't get it. But as time went on, I guess what has really turned my stomach on the whole GOAT thing is purely Masonry has an image issue that we're dealing with, that we've been dealing with for so long. And this is just one of those things that I see hurts our image more than creates the fun. Like when you try to balance the two, I see more bad in it than I see good. or more harmful capabilities. I guess what really, God, I still remember it too. It's burnt into my brain. What really just kind of drew the line for me is scrolling through Facebook one day, and there was an invitation to a third degree, which, the more you get into all this stuff, and I'm sure it transposes over onto the Oddfellows side as well, you start to, know these degrees and research them, and you respect them and the message behind them and stuff. The invitation to this degree was like a cowboy squirrel riding a goat. And that was the invitation to this guy's third degree that set his path for the rest of his life there. And that just really disturbed me. I'm like, that really just kind of.
Oh, well, then you don't want to come to a master's degree in Texas, because we may not have a goat, but there is a good chance you'll see a cowboy squirrel.
Well, if you've watched SpongeBob, Sandy is from Texas.
I hope it's poorly taxidermied.
Well, we've got a lodge here that does a fundraiser with mice races. So apparently down in Texas, we've got cowboy squirrel races going on. Got to do what you got to do to keep those lodges funded, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, that's kind of my take on the goat. It started out harmless, but over time, it's just left a sour taste in my mouth personally, which caused me to look into it deeper. And I have not so far been able to find a actual historical verifiable link of a goat in Freemasonry. Mm-hmm. What I did find, and what brought me and Ainsley to meet each other online, is a mechanical goat device that traced back to the Oddfellows. And my belief on that was, with Oddfellows and Masons sharing lodges so much back in the day, that this was probably, seen as something Masonic and carried on. Someone commented that their lodge has one of these, have had it longer than they've ever known, don't really know what it is, but it's there. And so anyways, that kind of started the conversation. Ainsley knows a lot about these mechanical goat devices and has some history behind it. So he's going to be so kind to share that with us. And then we're going to jump into a discussion on the goat and hash this out. Robert, before he jumps in, do you got anything on the goat?
I actually have an entire list of things I'd like to talk about with the goat, but first I'd really like to hear what Ainsley has to say.
All right, let's do it.
All right, cool. So hopefully, if I forget anything, I did do a talk on goats a couple months ago. I do have a YouTube video for it. I don't know if if I could send you guys a link at some point or whatever to include it with your notes for further goat learnings, I guess. So I'll try not to be super repetitive of it, but I'll hit the main points though for sure. So it seems like, as far as starting with that mechanical goats, the mechanical goats kind of arose, were like they were a symptom of the cause. So the whole goat thing was around for a long time, as it did start as a negative thing. It was started by these, people trying to discredit the orders and say, oh, they're doing weird rituals in there. You don't know what they're doing up there. I mean, for all you know, they're going to make you, they're going to make you get naked, and you're going to get strapped on a goat and ride around a room. They're just going to laugh at you. And there's old, old lithographs that you could find of like Oddfellows initiation, and it's got a naked dude backwards on a goat, and which is like totally not anything in any of our ritual. And it was just something. It just basically started as a lie by people trying to like basically discredit and devalue what our groups do. It started as almost like a degrading thing, and it kind of was like, yeah, well, you know what, maybe we do ride goats. And it just kind of started as like well, maybe we do, and started kind of teasing and being like, oh, well, wait till we get the goat up in here, maybe the goat will come tonight for the initiation, and everybody and so it kind of took hold, and as this kind of totally not related to anything, but just got kind of brought up and kind of ran with it. And then next thing you know, this mythological goat turns into enough of a thing that the Dumoulin brothers in Greenville, Illinois, started producing these goats, the mechanical goats, in the late 1800s. And they produced stuff for, you know, not just goats for Oddfellows, but goats for every fraternal order. Like the Woodmen of the World was like probably their biggest purchaser of the goats. And they made, you know, probably a dozen different varieties of goats. And it was such a huge factory that apparently at the peak of using the real goat horns on these goats, they would just bring in train cars full of goat horns that would smell so bad in the town that the town complained, and they had to switch over to cast iron horns because the real ones it was just stinking up the town in the summer of these rotting horns that they were getting brought in from all the slaughterhouses. So if you find one that's got the actual horn, that lets you know that's probably a really old one, because most of them will have that cast the cast horns. But the lodges were competing against each other for everybody's attention. So, you know, and they're also competing against vaudeville. So they started kind of buying these little side degree things that were totally not sanctioned. Goats were never sanctioned by the Oddfellows, and they even have in their ritual, you know, at different, you know, if you look at the beginning of the degree where you're like, shows like, okay, so-and-so wears this, so-and-so stands here. And then it'll have specifically written, you're not to make animal noises, you're not to use any devices other than those prescribed in the blah, blah, blah. It's very outlines. If you do this, your lodge will be in trouble. But a lot of lodges just went ahead and did it anyway, because they're like, well, if I'm not telling, you're not telling. And so, yeah, the goats kind of turned into this like sort of called like a spurless degree or a burlesque degree, a couple different little side degree type things that were just totally not allowed to be used. And I think it even got to the point where the Oddfellow equivalent of the Shriners, Amos, the Ancient Mystic Order of Samaritans, our fez-wearing fun side group, I think they use a camel. So it kind of evolved enough that it kind of did work in the ritual somewhere, but not into like actual Oddfellow ritual, but like a side group ritual in a way. But it's definitely, it was an entertainment thing. It was just supposed to be funny. It was never a very serious kind of thing. But you'll see if you look back through like jewelry and pins and stuff, you'll see a lot of like little goats on 3 links, or, you know, little watch fobs or celluloid pins with a goat and the 3 links. So there's a lot of, it just definitely, it worked its way into our mythos, even though it's not really part of it. And there's even a book called The Lodge Goat, which has, I think, from all different fraternal orders, like kind of little stories about the goat. And they're all written from the point of view that the goat is like an actual member of the lodge. And the cover of this book is actually like the goat's wearing an Oddfellows collar on the cover of this book. But like I said, it's like different fraternal orders did contribute to this book. But you can even find like reprints of the book online. It's pretty funny. Like it's like all kind of prose and jokes and stuff, but all from the point of view that, you know, a lot of members would treat the goat as this kind of fictitious member of the lodge that they would just talk about with reverence. Like, oh yeah, I haven't seen the goat in meeting and da-da-da, you know, oh, I wonder if the goat's coming tonight. And it just almost took on the idea of like the goat is like symbolic of like the members that aren't there or something. I don't know. It's just like a symbolic part of the lodge that, you know, it worked itself into our kind of, like, you'll see a lot of Oddfellows that have tattoos with goats in them. I have like a tattoo of a candidate riding a goat. But yeah, the goat is definitely a very, very beloved part of a lot of Oddfellows. I can't say like across the board, but, you know, we've had like a lot of past grandmasters at this point. When they were grandmaster, they used the goat on their pin, or it's definitely a lot more kind of, we have a friendlier relationship, I guess, with it, I guess. And it is fun. And I guess the seriousness that Masonry has, maybe we don't have quite as much of like that seriousness, because we maybe we don't have like, you know, the founding fathers' shoulders that we're standing on to, you know, really keep this image of like, you know, like of that I feel like Masonry feels like they have to uphold. I could be totally wrong as an outsider viewing it, but I feel like Masonry has like a more serious kind of like cloak they try to wear, and they don't want to kind of be seen as silly or jokey at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's some truth in that. And it's kind of nice to hear that from the outside looking in, we look like people who want to take ourselves seriously. Alex has expressed his disdain for the goat, and I would not want to and cannot speak for him, but I imagine a big part of that disdain has to do with the fact that it does put us in a goofy light. And generally speaking, the Masons who do talk about the goat or make goat sounds or threaten candidates with the mythological goat are often guys who don't take the ritual seriously enough.
I think that's probably one of the things that gets me too, is I connect those two very much, and it just on a dual level kind of irks me a bit. While I got the camera on me, just real quick, this is that book that he was talking about. This is not the original book, so it doesn't have the cover that he was describing. This is one of the forgotten books reprints. But
I've got the reprint of it.
Yeah, it's a monster of a book. Unfortunately, I still have not read this thing. I picked it up, and
I need to revisit it. I looked at it when I first got it, and I need to get back into it. I buy too many books that I don't read is really what it comes down to. But the little bit I did read was all definitely a lot of it was light. It was humor and light and fun.
Okay. So I think there's actually a pretty significant reason for that I think is more interesting than just a surface humor thing. Unless you've got more you'd like to elaborate on with that, I can kind of go that
I think definitely Mason's got a little bit more of a kind of a crappier hand as far as the goat goes, because it kind of did get tied in with your symbolism and stuff a little bit more than there's really no way to tie it to any of our symbolism at all. So I'll let you pick up, because that's more what you would be able to speak with authority on anyway.
Okay, I've got some notes here I'm going to kind of run through. First, I would say you mentioned and I don't know the pronunciation. Yours sounded right. Did you say DeMolin Brothers?
Yeah, DeMolin.
So if there's any Masons out there interested in hearing or reading more about that, volume 14 in 2006 of Herodom has an article on the DeMolin Brothers, and as it refers to the Goat Factory. It was written by brother John Goldsmith.
And he's actually a member of my lodge. So.
Oh, well, there you go. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
There's also, since we're on that note, in volume 16, 2008, an article titled Riding the Goat, Secrecy, Masculinity, and Fraternal Hijinks in the United States by William D. Moore. I'd like to give a shout out to Daniel Gardner, the secretary of Helena Lodge number 3 in Montana, for shooting these over to me as I was looking into some of this stuff earlier. Before I get into the history things I've dug up, I'd like to point out Brother Gardner's theory that I find to be rather interesting without giving away too much. There is a part in Masonic ceremonies where a brother is sometimes, hypothetically, potentially, this may or may not exist, get carried around on a tarp or a canvas or something along those lines. And depending on the lodge and the jurisdiction and the environment and the kinds of guys you have, it can be a very gentle carrying around, or it can be a little rougher. And I can tell you, for example, when I went through, the members of my lodge got a kick out of, well, kicking me while they carried me around. They'd kick kind of underneath it and make it sort of a bumpy ride, if you will, which is where I'm going with this. Brother Gardner has proposed that the idea of riding the goat may have come from being carried around in some manner or another and it being a bumpy ride. similar to a goat bucking. Now, having said that, and that may tie in with some of these other things I'm going to run through. If either of you want to stop me at any point to throw in anything, just go for it.
If you don't mind, before you get too far to that, I would detail, I just found out about this the other day, and I'm not going to go into any specifics or point fingers at anyone, but somebody had pointed out a jurisdiction, another jurisdiction, I'll leave it at that, actually uses it in their ritual, standardized, where they ask for the candidate to have something in preparation to feed the goat. And then kind of in the same correlation what you're talking about with the alleged tarp, that it is jostled in a manner to symbolize riding the goat. I was honestly kind of surprised to hear that. Robert, just your take on knowing what that degree, with, you know, without going into that degree, the symbolism behind it, what it means on a deeper level. I mean, do you think it has any place there?
Well, I'm going to have to cover this history stuff before I answer that fairly.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, because to me, without the historical background that at least appears to maybe be there,
sure,
then I think that the obvious answer would be no. But if you add in some context, there might be reason for at least maintaining the goat presence, because it likely served a pretty important role at one point. With that, I'll get started. Basically, what I'm going to lay out here is that I suspect, and this isn't groundbreaking. Ainsley was just describing this whole thing in a very similar manner. The goat thing likely began as a very serious and damaging rumor about what happened in our meetings by those who had no idea what happened in our meetings, in an era when our fraternity almost died as a result of anti-Masonic sentiments. So it was a very serious issue. Oftentimes throughout history and society, when an organization or an individual or a religion, what have you, gets bullied or accused of things or has some kind of negative aura cast on it unfairly, humor is often what we turn to in order to digest or even flip that kind of negativity upside down and twist it into a good. And I suspect that's kind of what started happening in the 1800s. There is evidence of lodges and Freemasonry being accused of goat riding, at least as far back as the 1840s. But again, this doesn't mean that lodges were riding goats in the 1840s. It means that people who hated Freemasonry for some reason or another were saying that we were running around with skulls and goats to put us in a bad light. I've found that in Mackey's encyclopedia, as well as two other sources, they drew some connections between the Renaissance witch trials and Freemasonry coming later, suggesting that the witches either did or did not use goats. Honestly, I would say that there's a good chance that there was some kind of goat symbolism or use happening in Wicca. And because people who found out about that didn't understand it, they started applying sinister ideas to it out of a place of ignorance. With the disappearance, or at least the diminishing of such witch trials, along came Freemasonry and Oddfellows and other secret societies that kind of inherited a lot of the targeting that the witches suffered through the immediately prior era. I did recently, in speaking with the Brazilian Mason, he wrote out for me the acronym they have there in Brazil for the Grand Architect of the Universe. It's Gadu. They sometimes refer to him as that acronym, or her, the deity, as that acronym. And he actually made a point of letting me know that they have a running joke there that Gadu or Godu is also a reference to goats. So apparently this is an international joke. In Morals and Dogma, I think the only mention of goats, I annotated Morals and Dogma several years ago to try to make it easier for me to look for things. And this one's actually in the back of the index that you can find, the digest. Pike refers to Kabbalists and alchemists in, I think it's the 28th degree chapter. It's either 28th or 29th. He refers to Kabbalists and alchemists hieroglyphically using goat heads to represent sulfur, which obviously had important significance among chemists in those early years, and I guess even today. And he refers to it as a very important symbol. So there's a tiny, tiny, tiny reference there in that most ubiquitous Masonic text, Morals and Dogma. I always like to make the joke, it's the most owned book in Masonry and the least read book in Masonry.
So true.
But, I think it would be easy to make the argument that it's most owned, maybe not as easy to make the argument that it's least read, because I imagine pretty much any book could get that argument.
Well, let's be more specific, and we can say it's the least completed. I think everyone's read a couple pages.
The earliest, if we want to really try to find something goat related in Masonry and reach as far back in time with it as we could, and we're not going to count, say, inheriting the persecution of the witch trials, then I would point to Dr. William Stukeley. He was a British Mason initiated in London in 1721. So we're talking just after the first Grand Lodge is formed, Freemasonry is kind of being formalized in a more widespread structural sense. He served as past master and was eventually buried, as most people are. In 1886, his grave was exhumed, and his coffin had a goat head emblem on it. And this is something that got a lot of attention because, again, 1886 is well after the point, at least 40 years after the point that it became common to accuse Freemasonry of having something to do with goats or goat worship. What I didn't mention on the Pike Morals and Dogma reference is he does tie the goat head to Baphomet. So there you go for the conspiracy theorists. That's something they like to throw out there. But if you read that whole chapter of Pike, it's not the super duper creepy thing in Masonry that is often made out to be. Last but not least, symbolically, there is or has been a reference to goats in a kind of interesting or unusual way, and that would be the Pentalpha, which is the name or one of many names for the five-pointed star, which is variously interpreted to descend from the Seal of Solomon, referred to as a blazing star, the morning star, very similar to the ancient Pythagorean symbol of health. The Pentalpha, five-pointed star. Well, it represents all of those things, or has represented all of those things at various points and in various places when it is upright and has the single point at the top. It has sometimes been interpreted when inverted, so that you have 2 points at the top and 1 point at the bottom to represent Baphomet or a goat. The 2 points at the top would then correspond to the two horns of a goat, and that would be an inverted Pentalpha. So all of that being said, these are the things I was able to just kind of run across in looking through a few books. I think for me, I'm not as offended when I see or hear references to goats, but I think it should be done in a way that is informed and particularly in a sense of not humiliating or scaring a candidate so much as remembering that anti-Masonic sentiment is real. It's dangerous for our organization. At times has led to Masons being killed in massive numbers. And I'm sure Oddfellows have suffered that at various times as well. And the people who were suffering in that sense, the brothers who were suffering in that sense, dealt with those very real dangers by turning it into a joke and insulating themselves with humor. For that reason, I think the goat had a very important historic meaning for some Masons, but only in that context. There does not to appear, as Alex has said, to have ever been instances, unless they were anomalies, of candidates actually riding goats into degrees. The closest we could get to that would be a very loose interpretation of a canvas.
Right.
And that's what I have.
That situation, I think, would almost be considered an innovation, because I don't think that's intended in that particular portion of the degree.
Using a canvas?
No, not using no, God, no. Trying to get me shot up. No, like trying to do the kicking and stuff and turn it into a goat symbolism.
Gotcha.
I would say it would be an innovation on the actual meaning and purpose of that legend in the degree.
Yep.
So I'm going through when I wrote the book for Gardner Lodge, I heavily relied on the Grand Lodge annual proceedings, and I not able to find it here at the moment. I'm looking through, but there was actually a quote that I remember at the time cracked me up, where the Grand Secretary kind of laid it out about the use of the goat and whatnot, but I'm unable to find that. However, searching through some of these, I am finding several references that almost seem to go back and forth as far as the manner in which it's used. We find, well, let me see here. I find a couple references where it's almost calling a group of Masons goats. And I guess I'll read it off here and see what you think. But it almost seems in a derogatory manner at some point. This specific one here, this is out of the 1870 proceedings. Quote goes, "There are some of the inducements that operate to render counterfeit or spurious metal current, and so long and wherever this is the case, we shall find a huddle of goats that wear the lambskin on them." Don't know where they're going with that, but it kind of went along with, let me find this other one that I just read here. Yeah, here's another. This is out of the 1905 annual proceedings, saying here, "These fellows are a fair sample of some of the goats that creep into our lodges and don the lambskin." What do you think? That almost sounds like they're trying to call somebody out.
Yeah. So
we obviously see in my jurisdiction, this is been a long time thing. But at the same time, it's also been a long time thing with people on both sides of the fence. But yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting that some of these guys are using the term against the other ones.
Almost like a wolf in sheep's clothing kind of.
Precisely. Another thing coming to my mind here that still kind of cracks me up / irks me to this day, as we were talking about earlier, on both sides of the fence, with some of the anti-sentiments. Back in the day, we had a lot of publications that were anti-Masonic put out there, and they would paint Masonry in a certain picture, and goats were widely used in that, kind of mocking the degrees, making just crazy and pitiful or daunting. believe it or not, to this day, my lodge in the Tyler's Quarter has like 8 or 9 of these old original prints framed up, and there's the goats all over the place. And I've mentioned on several occasions, like, these are all anti-Masonic, right? We even had a Missouri, basically the whole lodge came to visit us, and that was they were just kind of standing there staring at him and kind of looked at me. I'm like, yeah, I don't know, but it's one of those things that's been on the wall forever, so nobody
Were they anti-Masonic, or were they Masonic produced in response to the anti-Masonic accusations or jokes? I know what I'm trying to pinpoint is a subtle difference, but I think it's a difference nonetheless, in the kind of way that a
almost
victim,
like a theme that we would share today.
Yeah. Well, the way a bully victim will turn an insult into a victory. Go ahead.
No, to be fair on that, I guess I would really have to do the research on where that public. I mean, these are cutouts from my interpretation, and obviously I'm coming here with a bias. So from my interpretation, they come off as the anti-Masonic prints. I don't know who published those. So, I mean, there is the possibility that it did come from a Masonic source. And, that actually kind of interests me. I'm going to have to try to see if I can trace back, if there is any information on there for me to trace back to see where that came from. Personally, I want to say it's anti-Masonic just by looking at it. I don't think I would, at least, I mean, by the images portrayed in there, I would hope that a Mason didn't put those out, especially in those time periods when, I mean, we're pretty serious today about divulging too much information, but especially in that time period, I don't think that would have been taken too kindly for as far as what they depict.
So I've got a pretty elaborate example of the kind of turning the thing on its head for the sake of humor. If one of you guys have something else you want to throw in before I do this, it's like I said, it's elaborate. It's a little long, but I think it's enjoyable. I think the listeners and hopefully you two guys will get a laugh out of it, which was the point of the original thing in the first place.
I'm good.
Yeah,
Ainsley.
I feel like, before you go into that, I guess the only thing that I guess from listening to you guys and kind of feeling like the tone of the goat was used as more of like almost like sort of like to try to make it seem like you guys were either doing some sort of like pseudo sexual witchcraft occulty stuff with the goat, like, riding the goat obviously will have, some certain kind of negative connotations and, euphemisms for other things. And I feel like as far as like in Oddfellows, the tone of it was never quite as aggressively negative or maybe pursued as hard as a kind of a defrauding kind of device. So maybe that's why we kind of use it more of like a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. Like you'll see old photos of parades and there'll be like a goat, like actually like they'll have goats like in the parade. So I'm wondering if there's maybe the fact that you guys were like the butt of like the joke way more so, it seems, and hurt more by the joke than it was a little bit more casual, maybe like a casual bad joke against the Oddfellows.
Yeah, I can see the difference you're drawing there, and definitely.
I feel like maybe it just kind of like the teasing was taken to a whole other level with the Masons and accusing, with the Luciferianism and all the kind of like, and that definitely that connection does not I've not seen that made at all in Oddfellowship as far as the Lucifer connection, because we don't have anything that I guess somebody could maybe latch onto that could maybe be construed as that. So, because so-and-so mentioned in this one book on this one thing, and that means da-da-da, conspiracy theory wormhole of, this one thing means this, that, I feel like, just from the start, I definitely think the Freemasons get more scrutiny than the Oddfellows by far. So, but yeah, sorry, continue with what you were gonna.
No, that's good, and I think really useful. Also, you know what, I gotta say, Masons aren't very good at laughing at themselves.
Yeah,
I'm guilty of it. I have one of the worst sense of humors when it comes to myself, and At the same time, Freemasonry has helped really improve that flaw of mine. So there may be an element of that as well, and that maybe Freemasons got attacked with it more because they were so susceptible to it by taking themselves too seriously is a tricky thing to say, because I don't know that you can take Freemasonry too seriously personally. But we should all, there should be a balance of jocularity and reverence. And you lean too far in one way and you become vulnerable. So here's what I've got. I'm going to read it. It's got the intro. This was printed nationally in a Freemasons magazine in the 1860s. And it introduces itself. We give place to the following in our pages to gratify a fun-loving brother who thinks particularly well of it as an extravagant and ridiculous burlesque of the popular superstitious conceptions which, mainly through the influence of bigotry and priestcraft, have obtained among the more ignorant classes of people, especially in Catholic countries, in reference to the mysterious ceremonies and diabolical transactions which take place in our lodges. That essentially lays out exactly what I'm saying, that it identifies a few of the sources of the ridicule. It mentions Catholic. For the record, I'm not anti-Catholic. I'm very Catholic. I'm what they call Catholic Light Episcopalian, but it's very well known that, especially in that time, the Catholic Church sought to undermine Freemasonry. It also mentions bigots as being other than the priests. So they were pointing out that it wasn't just Catholic oppression, that there was political or other attackers, which we know of the anti-Masonic party. As it laid out, this is something a brother wrote that is based on the kinds of jokes and accusations being made by anti-Masons at the time, for the sake of making us laugh at and realize just how ridiculous the accusations were. I flatter myself I understand something about secret societies. I've had a passion for that sort of thing ever since I was old enough to tell lies. I have scouted around pretty extensively among the different organizations. I've been an Orange Man, and a Fenian, and a Good Templar, and a Counterfeiter, and also a Knight of Malta. I have belonged to the Sons of Temperance, and the Oddfellows, and the Young Men's Christian Association, and the Band of Hope, and a band of robbers. I've been into everything, and I thought I knew everything. Almost, but I didn't. 3 months ago, I became infatuated with Masonry, and since I joined that organization, I've discovered that there are several things connected therewith that outsiders don't know just a pretty good deal about. Now, Mr. Editor, I propose making these secrets public, not out of compassion for my fellow men who may be tending towards Masonry and act as a warning, and so on, because I haven't got a spark of human kindness in my breast, and would rather see every mother's son put to the torture than not, but because I have a spite against the fellows who initiated me, who made the irons too hot and the goat too frisky, and treated me with a roughness generally that the occasion did not warrant. Before fulminating my narrative, I will state for the benefit of those who don't know that Masonry is about 600,000 years old. It was old when the fraternity got into trouble at the Tower of Babel, and it was old when Adam first put on his apron as Grand Master in the Eden Lodge. As an aside, I'd like to point out that I think the satirical author who wrote this was absolutely wanting to point out how ridiculous and unfounded the rumors about Freemasonry were, as much as he was wanting to point out how ridiculous some of the claims made by actual Freemasons about our history or symbolism were, or origins for that matter. As a more convincing proof of its antiquity, I would just mention that a party of miners the other day in one of their excavations came upon the petrified remains of a Masonic lodge, with the members in their places and all complete. And eminent geologists who have examined the fossils are of the opinion that these bodies have been embedded in the rock for more than 15,000 years. On the evening I was to be initiated, I made my will and took a most affecting leave of my family. Thus prepared, I started for the lodge, accompanied by Brother John Smith, SRSPT, who was to see me through. We had no difficulty getting past the first entrance, but when we knocked at the second, a flat little fellow looked out through a round hole in the door and put this startling insticatory to Brother Smith. Chitux kron kai kon kagalorum. That's as good as I can do for the extremely long word. To which Brother Smith replied, Chitux kron nix my dolly wackadoo. The little fellow then said, Vladzets com tum tum tum. And my conductor, giving a satisfactory answer, we were permitted to enter. Before I had time to look around me, a long-legged fellow knocked me over with a club. He then stood me on my feet, and another marauder made a rush at me and brought me down again. After I had undergone this exhilarating exercise for about 5 minutes, they stretched me out on a bench and examined my teeth and pinched my muscles and stuck pins into me all over and shoved cayenne pepper up my nose and poured molten lead in my trouser pockets and pulled hairs out of the back of my neck with red-hot pincers with a view, I suppose, to make me feel unembarrassed and at home. When I came to my senses, I was alone in the anteroom of the lodge. It was a lively and cheerful apartment. A couple of crocodiles were amusing themselves in a corner, and a few full-grown rattlesnakes were practicing the flying trapeze on the stovepipe. The furniture consisted chiefly of half a dozen mummies, the skeletons of Captain Kidd, Lucretia Borgia, Guy Fawkes, Jack the Giant Killer, Oliver Cromwell, the Wandering Jew, William the Conqueror, Christopher Columbus, and Dick Turpin. A flying machine, 3 barrels of gunpowder, and a remarkably healthy and well-developed wild cat. Just then, a half-dozen pirates, clad in aprons and sashes, rushed into the room with a whoop. One of them, the biggest and ugliest, who appeared to be the chief, ordered the attendants in a voice of thunder to trot out the animal. The attendants disappeared, but immediately reappeared, leading an iron-clad goat. A regular double-decker with 16 horns, a pair of wings and 7 or 8 tails stuck all over him. My eyes were bandaged, and I was told to mount. I said, Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me, I would rather not. I'm not accustomed to going up in a balloon. Besides, I've got an engagement downtown. My wife wants to see me particularly. I'll be back in a few minutes. I rather think my house is on fire, but I'll be back in a few minutes. Ye gentlemen, in a few, before I could finish my sentence, I was seized from behind and planted firmly astride the infernal goat. Somebody then said, let go, and away we went. I've been through a good many perilous scenes. I've taken part in an election fight. I've been down in a railway collision and up in a steamboat explosion. I've fallen down 3 flights of stairs and walked out of a 4th-story window, but this goat excursion was a little ahead of them all. When I come to reflect on the matters in cold blood, I wonder that I ever came out alive. The furious beast kicked and screamed and rolled over and turned back somersaults and frowt somersaults and drove me against the ceiling and underneath the chairs till the bandage fell from my eyes and I had to let go. The goat vanished up the chimney in a blue flame, and I found myself in the center of the lodge room with about 50 masons in aprons and nothing else, dancing a war dance around me. The rest of the members were standing on their heads in the different corners, all but the cadaverous-looking buccaneer, who seemed to be the head of the department. Soon they left off dancing and marched round the room, chanting an inspiriting dirge. I was then hauled up in front of the chief's desk, who thus addressed me, Brother Cobb, you are now one of us. You are a member of an institution that has lasted over 3 million years. You are impervious to mundane influences. You are waterproof and fireproof. You are overproof. You can walk through the river or sit on a red-hot stove with impunity. Mortal man cannot harm you, and the devil himself must curl up his tail and walk off at your approach. Be virtuous, Mr. Cobb, and you will be happy. I then assumed a sash and apron. So, completely ridiculous. Absolutely unbelievable. But this was something that, at least according to the intro in that magazine in the 1860s, was expected to cause Masons to laugh across the country at a time when they were being persecuted. We were just coming out of an era when it was dangerous to go to the lodge. Guys were in fear that someone would set it ablaze in the middle of a meeting. That was a real worry. So I think it was coming out of that they were making jokes like this. Unfortunately, we mentioned earlier in the show that clandestine masonry is a problem. I think it is actually jokes or accusations or publications like this that a lot of clandestine Masons got a hold of at one point or another and tried to develop their bogus ritual on. And that's where we end up with cases in the news where just a few years ago there was a bogus lodge up in the New York area where a guy was killed doing some ridiculous stuff in an initiation that had no real basis in Masonry, but maybe could have come from some of these ridiculous
Is that the guy that had gotten shot because there's supposed to be a blank in the pistol and the old guy didn't load it correctly or had an actual live round?
Yeah, that's exactly
reading about that when it happened. I remember that was well before I was even involved in anything fraternal, and I remember reading that. The news article had a statement from an official being like, "This is not something that is part of our ritual. This is not supposed to be there. They were doing this on their own, unbeknownst to us," and completely tried to separate official from what that lodge had done. And that did stick with me as holy crap. That was...
So this particular parody here that was printed in a Masonic magazine, I didn't really realize till I was reading here with you, Ainsley. It mentions Oddfellows and also mentions the 6 mummies, which the actual reason I found this article was because last week was the 5th of November and I was looking through databases for anything that mentioned both Freemasonry and Guy Fawkes, which in this case was listed as one of the supposed mummies. You guys use full-on coffins and skeletons one way or another. I think it's fairly well known everywhere. Hopefully that doesn't come across as me revealing anything I shouldn't, but
it's something that it's commonly known, but we still, it's one of those things. It's like we don't admit it, but anybody who Googles will find stories of people buying old Oddfellow lodges and finding, a secret little hatch with the skeleton and the coffin in it and calling the police. And I'm sitting here thinking, why couldn't I have been that lucky?
We crossed one like that not too long, or probably a year or so ago, where same deal. Someone had bought a building and there was an Oddfellows lodge upstairs that had just been untouched forever. Yeah. And in cleaning it out, the guy that was helping them found a casket and was kind of like, what the heck? And opened it up and there was a full skeleton, and they actually traced it to be real human bones, and they freaked out. And someone came forth that I guess had connection to the lodge. Like, whoa, I need to tell you something.
Yeah. Well, that brings up an interesting topic then. So, and I guess if we're putting you in an uncomfortable position, please let us know.
No.
Yeah. If it's not something you're supposed to talk about, we definitely don't want to talk about it. But if it is okay to admit that y'all use something like that in your ceremonies, then is there reason to believe that it may have been common at some point to use actual bones? I do know, for example, I've been to lodges in other countries, Masonic lodges in other countries, where actual bones and skeletons are currently being used in ante rooms. Mm-hmm. So would that have ever been expected in an Oddfellows?
I think the best way to answer that question is if you look at the latest selfie I have posted, then that would answer the question.
Okay.
I think another one you're talking about.
Got it.
Yeah. It's definitely still a yes.
Okay, cool.
Not in every single lodge.
Sure.
Some of them use like a paper mache one, which are also, it's interesting. If you go into the collector's market, the paper mache ones are going for almost as much as the real skeletons are now. It's kind of interesting. That's a whole other topic for a whole other discussion. But so, yeah.
I'm actually in my lodge office right now, and I have a real skeleton here I can show you. Not exactly what we're talking about, but that's as close as a real skeleton as I get here.
Oh, that's awesome.
The bat, nice.
Yeah, it's a bat.
You? But to that topic, I do know of, and I won't say who they are, I just to be nice, but I know of several lodges in the United States that have real, or at least they claim to have real human skulls in use for chamber reflection purposes.
Mhm.
But I mean, those are pricey and hard to come by, so.
Yeah. And definitely, I mean, with anything Oddfellows, we are definitely a lot more shorthanded on new items than anything that Masons could, there's very few, like pretty much we're in a very DIY recycle kind of lodges close, and we take them and disperse it through everything else. So yeah, there's been a lot of skeletons changing hands and moving around, and I've got probably I have.
Are you sitting there counting your skeletons?
Yeah. So I feel like I'm like the home for wayward coffins. So there's only one that's real, if that makes any difference. But the rest are ritual coffins, but they only contain the simulations, not the. I've got one that's real that we will use when we do our initiations, but everything else is not. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, as I was digging through some of these I did find one remark here that kind of made me giggle as I was reading through it. This is out of the 1930 annual proceedings where they are, I guess, dealing with the frustration of taxes invading Masonic lodges, as we, deal with today commonly as well. And the remark that he put in here is, let me see, the Kansas Supreme Court, which provides for the taxing on these Masonic temples, have now taxed all of our other properties, from the lodge goat to our finest structures.
That's pretty funny.
There's a hint of subtle frustration coming through.
So we're lucky in Texas. We are actually Masonic lodges are tax exempt in Texas.
Is that right?
Yeah, so we don't pay taxes on our properties and stuff like that.
I don't know if I should comment on that or not, but they're working on that in Kansas. They're currently fighting us on it, but our Kansas Masonic Foundation is helping us with legal to get that done. They've granted it for at least a couple Masonic lodges and some other orders, but it goes through on a single by single basis. And I think now that they're seeing more of these come through, they're like, whoa. And I mean, they've got nothing to lose, right? So, well, I mean, they do. If they grant it, they lose all the taxes. So why not? They're just denying everything right now. So it's a continued fight, but that would make a huge difference. Not to change the entire conversation to that, but it would make a big difference. Well, Robert, what else you got?
I don't know that I have anything else.
Well, you did mention before we got into this, I'd asked you what your thought on it being involved into a degree, like we talked about earlier, what your personal thought was, if it should be there or not. Now that we've touched on some of the history, what would your thought be on it, at least associating it with our actual rituals versus a funny pastime comment?
I get you. In practice, I tend to stay away from the goat thing. I will tell you that when I was initiated at this lodge, they had, and it's still here, we don't use it, but a varmint call that makes a goat sound. And it was actually used during the blindfolded circumambulation, which I think is really lame and obviously going way too far. Very irreverent, much too jocular. The balance has obviously been thrown out of whack when you're doing stuff like that.
Right.
I'm not a huge fan of saying to guys, oh, is the goat ready and stuff like that right before their degree. If you're going to make a joke, I would at least ask that it be not on the same day as a guy's degree. So if it's like really early in the process, you've just met the guy and you just want to kind of throw a little joke out there about riding a goat, that's okay, especially and probably should be done with a very clear sense of this is a completely ridiculous idea, so let's laugh about it together, not I'm going to throw this out there to try to make you nervous. In all reality, if you're out there and you think it's fun to make a guy nervous by talking about goats before he gets initiated, I would just stress that it's not necessary. You're going to take a man and blindfold him, undress him, put him in a costume, and you're going to lead him into a strange room that may have strange smells if you're using incense, or if you're not using incense, either way. But he's barefoot, he's vulnerable, he's blind, he's nervous already. I mean, there's really no need to try to intensify that. So I think it's an unnecessary joke in that sense. The only place and definitely you asked specifically in relation to use during or with a degree. I just don't really think it's necessary or needed there or useful in any way. But in the historical sense, where we were kind of taking ownership of something that had been used against us, I think there's a lesson there from the goat that we would all do well to learn. Currently, nationally, the biggest way in which a symbol is being misused to put Masonry in a bad light would probably be the Eye of Providence, which I'm guessing is the same eye that's behind you there, Ainsley.
Yeah.
And if you show that,
one of the reasons for a lot of that kind of confusion between Oddfellows and Masonry and the copying, because we both use the all-seeing eye, but we all know where it came from before any of us came along. So, and it's such a universal symbol anyway that it belongs to so many cultures that which back to Egypt,
Yeah, exactly. Which in that sense maybe then doesn't belong to any culture, and that's really the point of all these symbols. There's truth in these symbols. They may be depicted slightly differently here and there, but we don't own that any more than Oddfellows do. So I really appreciate what you're saying there. But if you show that symbol to a lay person on the street right now, instead of any notion of Providence or the Egyptian god Ra or whatever else we would probably think of when looking at it, you're going to have them immediately talking about Illuminati, New World Order, the creepy ideas that have been built
Big
around
Brother's
that.
watching, kind of. Yeah.
Big Brother watch. That's actually, exactly. And I think that's a shame. So in that sense, perhaps the Eye of Providence is currently the goat or the skull of modern fraternities in America, in the way that goats and skulls in the 1840s, 1830s were being used to put us in a bad light. So the lesson to be learned then would be to figure out a way to regain ownership of the symbol of the Eye of Providence in a way that defeats the anti-Masonic causes of today.
I guess one way to look at it is that the goat is almost like the goat's the member of the lodge that nobody really wanted, and you have to figure out how to get along with, in a way, Like,
yeah, that's a great way.
Stuck with you got, but yeah, definitely like with the eye, it definitely gets turned into a more sinister, nefarious thing because it, they're like, oh, well, it's on the back of your money, so that means, it's indisputable. It's on your money. That's what it means. It's the Illuminati. It's some of the conclusions of, it gets, into like to the flat earth territory of conspiracy theories. Of, the robot voice on a YouTube video, like drawing these really weird, random, distant, like trying to connect dots that are not connected, but they're like, see, it's so obvious. It's all in plain sight. And it's, yeah, definitely. If like you look at the symbols of both our orders, and a lot of them are just, they're so universal. A lot of them are, you know, out of Judeo-Christian backgrounds. Obviously the goat has a lot of pagan, things that kind of are attached to it. And obviously that's why it would be a good thing for the anti-Masonic movement or any of the more of like the church-based anti-fraternalism books that were coming out in the 1800s, trying to align it more with this either like satanic or witchcraft or pagan or this impure bad thing that you don't know what you're getting into, and then you get into it and the next thing you know, oh my God, I'm a witch, you know. And I feel like that's how they try to make it sound now, especially with like the Masons, where it's like, oh, well, you know, the lower level Masons, they don't know, but when you get up to those upper degrees, that's when they reveal the truth to you. And it's, you know, I don't know if it's like you get like a special green bean salad that you're like the final casserole or something.
There's certain things we can't disclose. You get into the green beans, I got to cut you off.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll back away from the green bean casserole and the cake, because I know that's
that everybody knows that's what the G stands for, is green beans and goats.
Right.
You can tune in at our sister podcast. The G is for gossip, goats, and green beans, to learn more about that. And girls.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like a lot of these symbols are like what are drawing people, like the younger people, to it. You know, like they're intrigued by like the eye or the skull or whatever other symbols. You know, or like in Oddfellows, you know, the 3 links or the heart and hand are probably our 2 big immediate identifiers, and people get drawn in by that because they do want to know what is behind it and what's interesting about it. And I don't know with Masonic, you know, stuff, how it works as far as, you know, cleaning up ritual or whatever they try to kind of parade it as, by actually eliminating a lot of stuff and streamlining. But, you know, we have a lot of talks of that in Oddfellows, and there's a lot of debate on how to go forward and keep, you know, modern, but also, you know, let's reevaluate some of these changes that we've made historically, and are they still relevant, and do we still need them? And I definitely hope that like the symbols, you know, as misconstrued as they can be by people who are on the outside, but a lot of it is also very common knowledge that it's like, well, what does that mean to you? Well, that's what it means to us. But there's also some further stuff. But at the base level, I mean, you're going to be like, well, what does an eye do? It sees, it looks, it's, you know, and kind of getting into, well, something looking at you, but you looking out. And it's there's just such a beauty there. And it kind of sucks that like I'm going on a total other tangent with things, but to try to latch onto like one little thing and use that one little thing to try to flip it and harm the groups, and try to turn that one little thing that's such a rich, valuable lesson and turn it into this total other thing that has absolutely nothing to do with the lesson that it contains or the reminders that are there. And it's kind of sad because, like, you know, with me, like, you know, like all half of my shirts are either for my tattoo shop or they're like Oddfellows shirts. And I'll also have shirts from like some other companies that'll have kind of esoteric look and stuff. But if you look at like the pop culture trend of like the occult esoteric imagery, and you look at like, obviously there's a big design by people who don't know anything about fraternalism, and they're just kind of taking like a mishmash of things and putting them together because it looks cool. But, you know, they'll be like, okay, skull, that looks cool. Ooh, eye, that looks cool. And they'll kind of like make a cool looking picture that it looks like it should mean something deeper than it really does, but it's really just a cool looking picture. But at the same time, it's like almost like, is there a way we could kind of key into that and be like, hey, that's a cool picture you made. Why don't I teach a little bit more about that? And it's, I feel like there's like opportunities for both our groups to kind of use that almost as like a way to use the ignorance that is being spewed, but like the people who might be casually tuning in and catching that bad stuff, and try to catch those people before they get sucked too far in to the lies and the misinformation, and assume that like we're all, you know, like we're all gonna like Illuminati confirmed, and we're all having secret meetings where we're gonna like talk about how we're gonna take over the world next or something. And really we're just hanging out and having fun with our friends and doing some good stuff for the community, or, you know, just talking about life and how to make ourselves better people. So it's kind of one of those things that's like, it makes it seem more complicated and convoluted in ways that it's influential, in ways that it's not. It turns it into something it's not, but also kind of lies in a way that people come into it thinking it's going to be this thing. And then you're like, this isn't what I thought it would be at all. Like, where's my secrets to the world and my $1 million I thought I was going to win or something, you know? So
You didn't get yours?
I didn't get my $1 million from the,
Oh.
I'm in the wrong group. I'll have to join that Illuminati Brotherhood that keeps messaging me, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm sure you're getting all those too, right?
Yeah. We so funny thing, a brother Mason down in Laredo, Ruben Bassan, he started trolling those bots and scammers who try to recruit you to the Illuminati with a very, very specific theme, the tomato garden. So he responds to these guys who are promising him all of this wealth and fame and everything. He's like, okay, so that, you know, that Lamborghini sounds cool, but I've always wanted the tomato garden. Could you guys provide me with the tomato garden? And you can tell in the responses, he shares screenshots, and he'll have these guys going for days on end, where their responses, they're clearly just baffled at why the hell the guy's asking for it. And they're just like, yeah, sure, we'll give you a damn tomato garden. Just send us your money.
Yeah.
It's great.
That's awesome. Yeah. I, as like a social media admin, I have to delete comments spamming all the time and banning people. And it's just, it sucks that scammers are trying to take advantage of like our charity or charitableness, I guess.
Sure.
So try to be like, oh, well, y'all are a bunch of suckers probably because you give people money, so you better give me money. And, you know, it's kind of one of those things that I don't think it's working. So I don't, you know what I mean? I can't imagine anybody is that at this point in the internet game, like as far as like it being like I'm a Nigerian prince and you've won the lottery kind of level of bad scamminess to it.
Sadly, and I don't know of particular cases of it working, but sadly, I think, yeah, to you, me, and Alex, it's like unfathomable that somebody would be prone to that kind of a scam. But odds are those people have success with the same demographic that they have success in the general population, which are the older guys.
Yeah.
And that's probably a big reason they're targeting fraternities like the Oddfellows or Freemasonry. Our average age is pretty high right now. Yeah. And between being a charitable organization and being an older organization, we're kind of a soft target for stuff like that.
Yeah. And definitely, you know, oh, I want to join. How can I join? There's nothing, you know, it's definitely a lot of it is like trying to hook you and lead you into a conversation. And then there comes the, like, because you want to treat everybody, you don't want to profile, you want to treat everybody as an interested candidate. But then it's like you get a couple messages in and then it definitely, like, you're like, all right, I had my ideas that this was going to go this way and here it is. And then I got to figure out how to back out of this convo without looking like a jerk, because I'm representing my entire order by talking to you as the webmaster. So yeah. It's like, how do I manage this without, you know, making an embarrassment of anybody or appearing a certain way? And which is, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. And it takes time away from, you know, everybody's life. Yeah. It takes away. Yeah. The goat gets lonely.
Yeah.
Well, Ainsley, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show tonight. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your evening and offering up your expertise this evening to fill us in on not just the GOAT, but also on the just kind of the all-around nature of Oddfellows for all of us that have been interested. I want to go ahead and take this time to send it around for some final thoughts, and also give you an opportunity to throw out any contact information for you,
Awesome.
your lodge. I know you've got a tattoo business. Any way people can get a hold of you, learn more, and if they want to talk about it, continue to just a way to drop a line to you.
Cool. I'll go first then. So yeah, if anybody wants to get a hold of me, I'm pretty easy to find online on Facebook, Instagram, whatever. My tattoo shop is Vintage Karma, 2 words, Vintage Karma. And so if you look me up on Instagram, my Instagram handle is @Vintage Karma. And you can just look me up by my name on Facebook, pretty easy to find. And if you want to learn more about the Oddfellows, definitely check out IOOF.org. And if you have any questions, if there's a lodge near you or anything like that, and you need help finding somebody or getting somebody to contact you, like I know I sent you people for Kansas. Yeah, just pop a message into that contact box and I'll get back to you with some info. Also, I have me and a friend from Arkansas. We run a blog called Heart and Hand, and it's at oddfellowsguide.com. So if anybody wants to read some kind of up-to-date Oddfellow writings, that's pretty much the place to go to. And if you want to follow the Oddfellows on Instagram, it's at _odd_fellows. Yep.
Very well. Well, thank you again for coming on, man. I guess for my final thoughts, still kind of in the same spot for me personally. It's not going to go anywhere. I mean, obviously in today's day and age, the references are there. People find light in it. I guess kind of as we connected tonight, I see it on 2 levels. Probably a lot of the guys that are making those jokes really aren't as deep into it as I would like them to be. But I see that taken away from everyone else's experience to a degree. You know, I've read historically in some of the manuscripts of why it came around was some of the guys were trying to scare people out of it before they reached their 3rd degree, because then it meant they weren't worthy if they couldn't make it all the way through. You know, I don't know. There's a lot to be said there, but I don't think that has anything to do with who deserves to go through. The morals and the lessons and everything that go into it are very specific. And I think by putting the emphasis here, we're really taking away from what they should be taking away. Personal opinion. So, I mean, you know, all in all, I'm not a crazy fan of seeing it around. Just, you know, as I mentioned, the external precept of how the community outward sees us. Oh, I'm sorry, my Siri keeps wanting to join in the conversation. The external precept, how the community sees us outrightly, they get exploded with this stuff. And it's almost like with it coming from Masons, it's just a confirmation, both of, you know, connecting their sinister thoughts or just that it's a joke from both sides there. But definitely more than anything, I would just plead, if you're going to make the jokes, whatever, fine, but it really has no place in the degree work. Personal opinion, as I've heard, there's other, at least a jurisdiction that does see that it does. Personally, I just think that's unfortunate. But I'll kick it over to Robert for your final thoughts.
My final thoughts on Oddfellows. Thanks so much, Mr. Heilich, for, did I say that right, Heilich?
Heilich. It's
Heilich.
good.
For enlightening us on the Oddfellows. I've always found it to be an interesting organization. If Freemasonry didn't already eat up so much of my time, I'd probably look rather seriously into the Oddfellows. Maybe will someday. It's interesting to see some of the parallels as well as some of the differences. Thanks a lot for giving us a tour of your lodge. A lot of times
Absolutely.
our listeners ask me whenever I visit their lodges, well, should I listen on Spotify or should I watch on YouTube? And in this case, we've got an episode here where it would definitely be worth it to watch the footage. As for goats, I think I've laid out a fairly reasonable argument in favor of the goat's place in history of Freemasonry.
Sure.
It definitely served a valuable purpose, but it's hard to make an argument for it currently, unless all parties involved are well aware that it's a joke and it's not happening at a time when jokes aren't appropriate. So even then, I don't know what it would add to anyone's experience. And that's what I've got on goats and Oddfellows. I would also like to thank Brother Powers for finally letting us know what the G stands for in Alex G. Powers.
Touche.
Yeah, I
Goat
think it's just
hater.
a testament to technology and social media being used for good things, which a lot of people think is good for nothing now. But the fact that, you commented on on one of Carl's things, right? And then I commented, and then here we are, it just starts with a comment or a post on Facebook, and here we are. And I think that's, social media done right.
Exactly. Yeah. There is definitely things out there to learn besides the joke factor. So yeah, this was definitely a very beneficial and enlightening conversation. Dude, so much appreciate. I didn't even comment on the Oddfellows side of this program. I guess I'll apologize firsthand to the viewers and listeners. This is probably one of the longest episodes of Historical Light we've done, but I think it's also one of the most in-depth. Really, I mean, we're covering two topics here, right? The first half of the show, we really dove into Oddfellows and some kind of the crossover connections between the two organizations, and then we tackled that subject of the goat. So hopefully you guys stuck around. If you need to watch it in two parts, definitely do that. But I think we got some really valuable information and discussion going through the entire thing. So I hope you enjoy there. I would definitely advise you guys to check us out on the Facebook group. That is the Historical Light Masonic Research Group on Facebook, where we always continue the conversation of the show there. If you're not a member, make sure you go there, click join, and get in on those conversations. There's a ton of Masonic Facebook groups out there, Facebook groups in general, but we really try to keep this one very specific, as so many of the other groups are just kind of a plethora for anything and everything. Our Facebook group for Historical Light is strictly history. We vet those comments. We keep everything into the Masonic research and Masonic history origin. If it's not that, it's not going to be on there. If it gets on there, we're going to get it off of there. So keep that in mind. If you have any interest in Freemasonry, click on and join that group. Ainsley, you can definitely get in on there as well. It's not closed to just Freemasons, but anyone that has an interest in that subject. So as we continue the conversation there, someone might want to holler at you about some of those cross connections as well. And that'd be a great place to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to, in the future be on your show or vice versa. If I get my blog going for the blog, then,
that
definitely
fantastic.
Because I feel like we just barely scratched that surface of the crossover as well. There's so much that, our commonality that that I feel like we could all learn from one another. And
for sure.
Yeah, I think, kind of coming from a place of learning as opposed to a competitive standpoint, which I think some people think it has to be competition, and it doesn't. There's room for, it's not like you got to pick.
Yeah. Well, in closing, let's do this. We will continue the conversation in the group.
Awesome.
I'm challenge everybody to listen to those comparisons that we went through and bring up anything else that maybe you have questions on in deeper, or maybe that we didn't touch on. And we will go ahead and right now plan a part 2 of the comparisons between Oddfellows and Freemasons. And we'll make sure that we continue that conversation. So if you're in that group, make sure you drop us a line on what you thought about the episode, what you thought about the comparisons, what other questions you might have. And we'll make sure we have a part 2 and we'll dig into it even deeper, because I can guarantee, like you're saying, that it's a very true statement of we could probably do 5 or 6 episodes on just that. I know in Freemasonry, I describe it as an onion a lot. You can really go as many layers deep as you like to. And I'm sure a lot of that resembles over into the Oddfellows as well. So I think we could have some lively conversations there.
Absolutely.
One thing Brother Robert touched on was our sister podcast. I do want to give them a shout out. That is the G is for Gossip. It's a new podcast and YouTube show like this that's hit the market. They're doing something really unique and interesting. So they're talking about everything in Freemasonry, right? They're touching on all the subjects and their thoughts on it, but from a different perspective than we've seen before. They're doing it from the ladies' perspective, and that's kind of like a weird subject in Freemasonry, right? We don't have ladies, but Masons have ladies. So this show is taking everything in Freemasonry from the wives and the girlfriends and the ladies' perspective of how they address to it, how they relate to the teachings of stuff in Masonry that gets brought home, how it affects their family, how it just affects them being involved by dating or being married to a Mason, and how that all translates out. So it's a really cool show. They're just getting started out. I want you guys to go check them out. They're all over the place as well. They're Facebook, everywhere. So give them a listen, give them a view, and show them some love. I think they got a great thing going on, and I want to see it expand for them. I'm really proud of what they're doing. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, and hopefully grow the community of Masonic ladies out there to come a little more tight-knit, because I think that does play in very well. As we always mention at, Grand Lodge festivities and everything else, it's important to thank the ladies, because we can't do what we do without their support, at least not well. It doesn't translate over. So with that, I know we've covered a ton tonight. I hope you all enjoyed, and definitely go check out the Facebook group for more. If you do enjoy Historical Light, you can definitely support the show by going to the website. Click on, contribute, something like that. Totally forgetting, drawing a blank here, but you can do that safely and securely through the means of PayPal, and keep the lights on for the show. We'd greatly appreciate your support. But until next time, protect history, seek light. This is all we got, guys. Masonic history is what it is. It's disappearing before our eyes. So go out there, research, recover, and promote it. Until next time, we'll see you in the group. Keep seeking light. See you, brothers.